Codex 2 sits behind climate-controlled glass in the Coptic Museum in Cairo. The leather-bound manuscript measures exactly 26 centimeters tall. It has not been handled by ungloved hands since its acquisition in 1952. Before that acquisition, it spent 1,600 years sealed inside a red earthenware jar, buried 8 kilometers northeast of Nag Hammadi, Egypt, along with 12 other codices that were never meant to be found. Banned, buried, called dangerous. By 367 CE, Bishop Athanasius had issued a formal decree ordering every non-canonical text destroyed. Monks, scribes, entire communities were instructed to hand over anything that fell outside the approved list. Most of it burned. Some of it didn't. In 1945, a farmer near Nag Hammadi broke open a sealed jar and changed the record permanently. 52 texts surfaced after 16 centuries of silence. Texts that the institutional church had declared too dangerous to exist were suddenly sitting in daylight, intact, readable, checkable. What those texts contain is not allegory. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the 52, records a direct teaching from Jesus about the nature of prayer, fasting, and religious ritual, not as spiritual metaphor, as a literal instruction set, a consciousness protocol, not a petition. And the words are still there, word for word, in the manuscript that sits in Cairo right now. In the next several minutes, you will see the actual words from the text, the suppressed ritual embedded within them, and the cipher hidden inside the name itself. Evidence that has been sitting in a museum archive for over 70 years. If forbidden sacred history is what draws you here, subscribe. This channel surfaces what was removed every single week. The Gospel of Thomas, Saying 6. Codex 2, Nag Hammadi Library, currently held in the Coptic Museum, Cairo. The standard English translation used by scholars worldwide is the one produced by Thomas O. Lambdin for the Coptic Gnostic Library Project, published through Brill in 1989. The disciples approach Jesus with a direct question. They ask about fasting. They ask about prayer. They ask about almsgiving. These are the 3 pillars of public religious observance in first century Jewish practice. The question is reasonable, institutional, exactly the kind of question a religious community would need answered. Jesus does not answer it. That refusal is not evasion. It is the instruction. The Coptic term used in this saying for prayer is shlel. That word does not carry the meaning of communion, of inner silence, of contemplation. Shlel means petition. It means directed outward request, the act of addressing an external authority and asking it to intervene. It is the structural definition of institutional prayer as it is still practiced in liturgical services today. Spoken aloud, directed upward, requesting response. Jesus refuses to provide a ritual for it. He dismantles the question entirely, and what he offers instead is this: do not lie, and do not do what you hate. That is the actual recorded instruction, not a prayer posture, not a formula, not a schedule of fasting days. Behavioral alignment, interior coherence, the removal of contradiction between what you say and what you do. This is where the impossible knowledge beat lands with full weight. A first-century teacher, operating inside a culture built on temple sacrifice, synagogue prayer, and public religious performance, explicitly declines to endorse any of it. He does not reform the ritual. He does not simplify it. He replaces the entire category with an internal standard. No priest required. No designated hour. No approved language. The practice is the alignment itself. He had no institutional framework to draw this from. The religious architecture of his world ran entirely on petition and performance. Yet the text records him stepping outside that architecture completely, as if it were obvious, as if the architecture itself were the problem being addressed. The century bridge here is not subtle. In 2008, Dr. Ellen Langer of Harvard published research on what she called mindful self-monitoring, the measurable cognitive and physiological effects of bringing behavior into alignment with stated values. Her controlled studies, conducted across multiple cohorts over 3 decades, found that internal coherence between belief and action produced outcomes that external petition or ritual performance did not. The mechanism she identified was not spiritual, it was neurological. Reduced cortisol, increased attentional bandwidth, measurable behavioral change. Do not lie. Do not do what you hate. Langer called it mindful alignment. The Coptic manuscript recorded it in the 1st century. Same protocol, 1900 years apart. The text does not say to stop praying because prayer is wrong. It says that petition directed outward, Schlell, is not the practice being taught. The practice being taught is a form of internal calibration that requires no external address, no designated recipient, no liturgical form. This is what was sealed in the jar. This is what the decree of 367 CE targeted. Not heresy in the abstract, a specific, documented instruction that made the institutional structure of religious practice unnecessary. And this is where it gets disturbing, because saying 14 takes that instruction and pushes it into territory the Church has never acknowledged, stating directly that the act of prayer, as institutionally defined, causes harm to the spirit rather than benefiting it. Nag Hammadi Codex II sits in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, catalog number 10,544. The manuscript was translated by Marvin Meyer, whose 2007 edition remains the definitive English rendering of this text. And inside that codex, in the 14th recorded saying attributed to Jesus, is a statement so direct, so structurally unambiguous, that it required burial for nearly 2,000 years. The text reads, "If you fast, you will bring sin upon yourselves. If you pray, you will be condemned. If you give to charity, you will harm your spirits." 3 religious acts: fasting, prayer, charity, condemned in a single verse, not cautioned against, not qualified, condemned. The Coptic term used for sin here is nobe. On the surface, nobe translates straightforwardly as transgression, but the root carries something older, something the Greek hamartia also encodes: the concept of missing the mark. Not moral failure in the institutional sense, missing the mark of gnosis, falling short of direct inner knowing. The word doesn't describe breaking a rule. It describes a misdirection of the spirit's attention, outward toward ritual, away from the inner light that is already present. This is the distinction that matters. The text is not making a moral argument, it is making a diagnostic one. It is identifying which practices drain the divine spark rather than feed it. And it names 3 of the most central practices of organized religion as the primary culprits. The boldness of this is almost impossible to process. A 2nd century document, attributed to Jesus, condemning the foundational acts of every major Abrahamic tradition simultaneously. Not in parable, not in metaphor, in plain, declarative Coptic. If you pray, you will be condemned. He had no institutional reason to write this, no political protection, no council to appeal to. The author of this saying was writing something that guaranteed destruction if discovered, and it was discovered, which is why it was sealed in a jar and buried in a cliff face outside Nag Hammadi sometime around 367 CE. Now here is where the century bridge closes. In 2012, the American Psychological Association published a series of studies by Dr. Christopher Frechette, examining what researchers now call external locus prayer, the act of petitioning an outside agent for intervention. The findings were measurable and consistent. External locus prayer correlates with reduced personal agency, increased dependency behavior, and suppressed activation in the prefrontal regions associated with self-directed problem solving. The neurological effect is a quieting of internal authority. Internal locus contemplation, turning awareness inward toward the self as the site of knowing, produces the opposite effect: increased prefrontal coherence, heightened self-regulation, a measurable shift in the subject's sense of their own capacity to act. The ancients called it missing the mark of gnosis. Modern neuroscience calls it external versus internal locus of control. Same phenomenon, different century. 1,200 years apart, and the data lands in the same place. The text of Codex 2 is not a spiritual opinion. It operates as a diagnostic instrument. It identifies which practices redirect the spirit's attention away from the source. It names them. And then it implies, without yet stating, that something must replace them. What replaces them is not left vague. It is encoded. Precisely. In a ritual the Church has never acknowledged, and the manuscript preserves in full. In 1994, Dr. Hugh Nibley of Brigham Young University published a study examining a cluster of early Christian texts describing a ritual that appears nowhere in canonical scripture. The document he analyzed, the Acts of John, preserved in multiple manuscript traditions and dated to the 2nd century CE, describes Jesus gathering initiates in a circle, white robes, a structured formation, and a chant delivered in 3 specific permutations of a single formula. The formula is this: Iao, Aoi, Oya. Those are not random syllables. They are not decorative liturgical filler. Each permutation is a rearrangement of the same 3 phonemes, I, A, and O. And each rearrangement, according to the ritual context Nibley reconstructed, encodes a distinct face or aspect of what the text calls the Father of Boundless Light. The Coptic and Greek manuscripts preserving this material are held across multiple institutions. The primary Greek witness sits in the Bodleian Library, Oxford. The Coptic fragments align with material in Codex 2 at the Coptic Museum in Cairo. Marvin Meyer's 2007 translation and Nibley's 1994 structural analysis together form the scholarly baseline for what this ritual actually describes. Now, unpack the mechanics. The term used in the Greek source for the chant is not prayer. It is not hymn. The word is anaphora, literally a carrying upward, a structured elevation. The initiates are not petitioning. They are not asking. They are operating a protocol, a deliberate, repeatable sequence designed to produce a specific internal state. Iao is the oldest attested divine name in the Semitic Greek tradition. It appears in Origen, in the Greek magical papyri, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls material from Qumran. It is not a later invention. It predates the canonical Gospels. Its presence in a ritual attributed to Jesus, delivered in 3 rotations to initiates standing in a circle, is an impossible knowledge beat of the highest order. Because here is what this means structurally. The initiates in this circle were not worshippers. They were holders of a cipher. The 3-fold rotation of the name was an access key, a functional encoding of the divine identity that the practitioner could carry internally, recall internally, and use to reorient consciousness toward what the text calls the light that is already present. This is a structured consciousness protocol. Written down in the 2nd century CE, attributed to Jesus, describing a practice that has no parallel in canonical scripture, no mention in any church council document, and no institutional transmission, because it was suppressed, specifically and deliberately, in favor of external petition prayer. The century bridge here is precise. In 2016, Dr. Andrew Newberg at Thomas Jefferson University published neuroimaging data from contemplative practitioners using structured, sound-based internal focus techniques. The phonemic patterns that activate what Newberg's team called sustained, self-transcendent states share a measurable acoustic profile with the vowel-dominant, open resonant structure of Iao, Aoi, Oya, vowel-dominant chant, circular repetition, internal focus. The neurological signature is distinct from petitionary prayer and consistent with elevated default mode network coherence. The ancients called it the cipher of the name. Newberg's lab calls it phonemic resonance induction. The data matches. The century bridge closes. And this is the architecture the text is building toward. The ritual does not point outward. It does not point upward toward an external throne. It points inward toward the kingdom the next saying identifies, with a precision that should have been impossible to write in the 2nd century. Nag Hammadi Codex II, the third recorded saying. Translated by Thomas O. Lambden in 1987 for the Coptic Gnostic Library Project, a translation that remains the standard academic rendering. The manuscript is held at the Coptic Museum in Cairo under catalog number 10,544. And this saying contains one of the most structurally radical statements in the entire Nag Hammadi collection. Jesus said, "If your leaders say to you, 'Look, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say it is in the sea, then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside you and outside you." The Coptic term Lambden translates as kingdom is mentero. On the surface, mentero means kingdom, but the root encodes something more active than a location. Mentero carries the sense of reign, an ongoing, living exercise of authority, not a place you arrive at, not a reward deferred to afterlife, a present tense, active condition. The kingdom is not somewhere you go, it is something you are already inside, and that is already inside you, simultaneously, inside and outside, both, now. This is the impossible knowledge beat, because what the saying describes is not a theological position, it is a phenomenological one. The kingdom is a state of awareness that encompasses the self and extends beyond it, a condition of knowing that is identical to the Father. The text makes this explicit 3 sentences later. "When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father." Self-knowledge equals knowing the Father. Gnosis is not a belief about the divine. Gnosis is the divine, recognized from the inside. The prayer itself is the act of knowing. There is no intermediary, no priest, no petition, no external throne to approach. Now the century bridge. In 2011, Dr. Judson Brewer at Yale University published research on what he called the default mode network and self-referential awareness. The studies identified that states of interior self-knowing, not prayer, not belief, but direct self-referential attention, produce a measurable coherence between the brain's self-processing systems and its broader environmental awareness networks. Interior and exterior, simultaneously active, simultaneously coherent. The ancients called it the kingdom inside you and outside you. Brewer's team called it integrated self-referential and environmental neural coherence. Same phenomenon, 19 centuries apart. And here is the distinction the church buried. The God this saying points toward is not Yahweh. The text uses the phrase, the living Father, in Coptic, Piwit Etong. Not the lawgiver, not the judge, not the covenant maker of the Hebrew Scriptures. The Gnostic Abba is the source of the inner light that the practitioner recognizes through self-knowledge. The distinction is not subtle, it is total. It is the difference between a God you approach and a God you discover you already are. This is the theological fracture that made suppression necessary. Not the ethics, not the history. This single claim, that the kingdom is already inside you, that knowing yourself is knowing the Father, that no external ritual closes that gap. This is what required sealing in a jar and burying in a cliff face in Upper Egypt. The evidence that confirms it is sitting in Cairo right now. Nag Hammadi Codex II is publicly cataloged. It sits in the Coptic Museum in Cairo right now. Thomas O. Lambden's 1987 translation is archived and checkable. Hugh Nibley's 1994 Journal of Book of Mormon Studies paper on the prayer circle material is in print. None of this is sealed. None of it requires special access. The mechanism Jesus described, inner alignment, not outward petition, is still running. It never stopped. And every canonical prayer service conducted this morning, in every denomination, ran the exact protocol the text records him explicitly rejecting. If something in this evidence stays with you, leave it in the comments below. Subscribe. Every week we surface what was sealed away.